and welcome to another week of the Squiggly Career Podcast. I'm Helen Tupper and I'm one of the co-founders of Amazing If, and I'm here with the other half of the business, Sarah.
Hello.
And we come to you every week with our podcast all about the skills you need to navigate your squiggly career and help you to be successful in this squiggly world of work that we're now all in. And this week we're going to be talking about presentations and the role that they play in a squiggly career, and give you some of our experiences and hints and tips that we think can help you to do better presentations and to have a more authentic self. So before we dive into that, maybe Sarah, a bit of context on how the topic of presentations fits in with what we normally talk about in squiggly careers.
Well, we were having this debate before we actually started around presenting. Is it relevant for everyone? It means lots of different things. And I think today what we're particularly interested in is most of us in our jobs at some point need to be able to communicate your ideas or your points of view in a really compelling way, whether that's in front of 3 people or 130 people. Some people might be those people who kind of quiver at the thought of having to present ever. You know, it's bottom of their list of how they want to spend their time. And other people will quite enjoy the experience and actually be something that you really look forward to. So hopefully there'll be kind of something for everyone in today. And what we actually thought we would start with is thinking about some of the best presenters that Helen and I have experienced and seen kind of in real life, and maybe what they did differently, what they had in common, and what we thought we could learn from them. And last week, actually, I managed to attend 7 different events in about 4 days.
That's crazy.
And it was a bit of a killer. Some of those events I was speaking at in various different capacities, or sometimes I was just there to listen. And so I've tried to pick out a couple of people who I can really remember a week on, what they said, how they made me feel, and the impact that they had on me. And they came to mind when I was thinking about the best presenters and what we can learn from them. The first guy, who I think, Helen, you'll also know, is a guy called Sam Conniff.
Yes, of course.
So Sam is launching his book this week called How to Be More Pirate.
Yeah, I think it's like number
just
one in
is it
Amazon.
just Be More Pirate,
Be More
I think?
Pirate.
Be More Pirate.
I think it's number 1 in the Amazon business chart. So
well done, Sam. And what I found really interesting about Sam is I've seen him present about being more pirate and what that means twice in the last month. So we happened to be at one event together where he was on before me, and then he came and presented at an event that I was running. And it was fundamentally the same presentation, but he took that presentation from being very good the first time I saw it to great the second time. And I actually commented to him afterwards. I said, "Oh, wow, that was brilliant. I thought you've kind of really moved that content on." And what he said to me, which I really admire, is that he took the time to watch the video of him presenting the first time to work out where he wanted to improve. And so he's naturally funny and passionate and really knows his subject area. So they're all kind of qualities I think make for a really good presenter. What I just thought was fascinating was for somebody who comes across as probably, I bet loads of people in the audience just think he gets up and just can do that. Actually knowing that behind the scenes he takes the time to want to do a really great job for the audience, communicate his ideas in the best way possible. He's prepared to self-reflect and make tweaks and continue to improve, because he doesn't have to do that. He'd already be a brilliant presenter. And I think that is a characteristic I see again and again of the people who are really great at communicating their ideas and sharing their thoughts. They're always being work in progress. And
then maybe getting a mirror to how they're showing up, so that they're not just assuming that the impact they want is actually sort of what's happening in the room.
Yeah. Who's one of your kind of top presenters?
I was thinking when you're talking, actually, I've got 2.
Okay.
There's one that we really random. You're like, why is Helen talking about a sports person? So I've come on to that. So
I didn't even know that you knew any names of any sports people.
Not the most sporty person, just to let people know that.
We'll
come on to the sports person. The person that's a kind of a bit more that Sarah will know is Satya Nadella, who is the CEO of Microsoft, the global CEO. So obviously, a very kind of successful senior person in business. But what I find fascinating is the way that he presents. And working for Microsoft, we get to see that, and we have these monthly Q&As that are recorded where we get to see it. But also we have big conferences where he gets on stage. And I mean, these conferences there's like tens of thousands of people in stadiums. So you kind of expect people to be really like what we were talking earlier, jazz hands and big voices, and he is not like that. He leaves massive pauses. I would expect that he's an introvert. I would expect that. He is considered in what he says. He is slow. He leaves big pauses. He is not the aren't we all doing amazing? He's not that person. Yeah, he's not that at all. We definitely have some people who do that, which is great, but he is not that. And it is so, he moves people. Like, you want to hear his story. You want to hear, it's his tone and the empathy when he speaks and the pace, and it's so different to other people. It's so unique to him that it's just compelling, and I am sure he's been coached on those things. But what's really powerful to me is that it's very distinct to other senior leaders as a style, and it feels very unique to him, and it feels like he's really, really honed it. And some of these techniques that other people will say about using long pauses and, you know, using, it's not the tone of your voice, it's almost like how loud you're speaking. What's the professional term for that?
Intonation?
Yeah, intonation and the volume that you're using, all those kind of things. But he uses it. Other people, you know, I'm sure speaking coaches would talk that through to you, but he does it in such a natural way. I actually don't know whether he's ever been coached or this is just him. It's so natural that I almost just think he just has always presented like that. And so I find that really, really powerful. And it does make me think about there's lots of things that he does that I definitely don't do. And it makes me think, I wonder if I could take some of those pauses and being a bit more intentional about the words I'm using, the pace, the intonation, to have a bit more impact.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting balance. When you're thinking about presenting, the best presenters absolutely, I think, start from their own DNA. They start from their own style. They don't try and, this is not a robotic, here is a checklist of 10 things that will make you an awesome presenter. I don't believe in that, in terms of that's not the best way to have impact. Start from where you're already at your best. So for somebody like me, I'm naturally enthusiastic and smiley, and will often try and build a relationship with the people that I'm talking to. If I tried to be very serious, it just wouldn't come across as being me or kind of who I am. But knowing what are the small differences you can make in terms of your presentation style, how can you be adaptable, I guess, can be really powerful. So knowing for your audience, well, when do you need to slow down a little bit? It might be because you're introducing something that's quite complicated, or maybe they've not heard before. Or if you're really trying to make a point, giving people a moment to just reflect on that point before you move on, rather than... Often, I think when you're presenting, I hear this a lot from people, you're just so keen to get through it. You don't want anyone to ask you questions. You want zero interruptions. You're like, right, I have practiced this. Just let me get through it. I think there's almost quite a big tipping point for people when you get confident enough with presenting, where certainly if you're in a smaller setting, that actually it's okay for people to interrupt you, and you're all right for it to become more of a conversation than a one-way presentation. Yeah.
But I know for a lot of people that often feels quite an intimidating shift, because you go, well, I'm in control. When it's I actually also find when I'm presenting to a really big group, I actually often feel quite confident, because they can't do anything.
They can't drag you off stage if you're rubbish, but they probably could.
So who's your sports person then that you were alluding to earlier? Because I'm not sure I quite believe it.
So, do you know what? I'm slightly worried I can't remember what sport he could do, but I remember him and I remember the presentation. Right. So it's Roger Black, who I think is a runner.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, old school. That is an old school
Roger
reference.
Black is quite old school. So he's an
400 metre runner.
Ran for Great Britain in the Olympics quite a few times, probably totally undermining his career. Kind of a legend in British athletics, I think. Anyway, I've seen him do a presentation twice, because I think he's now on the speaker circuit.
Right.
And he tells a story about how the team had like some failure and how they all came back together and how he got ready for the race. And I remember it's such a moving story. There's such emotion in it. Now, he is definitely, I saw the story twice, and it's the same story. So he has definitely got that down to a pat, and I'm absolutely sure he's been coached on it. But it felt like it had what you'd call a story arc. So, you know, like he'd got a presentation, and this I think is less appropriate for if you're doing a presentation to your team at work about how the business is doing. It's much more like if you've got a chance to tell your story on stage. But it felt like he had some drama. There was a hint of defeat. There was a comeback, and there was a climax and some success. And it just felt like a story that you were sucked into. It was his story, and there was some emotion involved in it. So I think what I learned from that was that, you know, if you're doing a presentation where this is about you and your achievements and you're telling other people, I would still do this if maybe the first time I'm meeting my new team. I'm not saying you always have to be on like a massive stage to tell this story, but it was a very considered, what's the emotion that I'm trying to create?
how do I start this story? Where's the peak? Where's the
it's like a start, middle and end still.
Yeah, but it's more than that. I think it's like, where's the emotion coming in? Where's the element of risk, and then kind of what's the climax, and just thinking through those points, because I think it's natural that you'll lose people when they're listening to you.
Yeah.
But those are your hooks to get people back in, and it was just very compelling. And even though I know very little about sport, and it's just not something that engages me, there's just that human story with those moments, really, really powerful.
Actually, and I had a similar experience. So last week I saw a guy talk called Niram Vinod, who works for Instagram. And actually he got on stage and sort of said, I'm not really a presenter. It's not how I feel most comfortable. And he was alongside some people who were very kind of pros. They obviously present quite a lot. But his was one of the most compelling for me. And that's because, again, he'd made it very personal. So it was really authentic. It was really interesting. And he obviously had really cared and thought about what he was going to talk about. So he'd got images of his partner who was pregnant. Oh. He was talking about some of the side projects that he'd done. He just told some really interesting stories, and he was also vulnerable. And I think actually a lot of the best presenters have an element of vulnerability. They're prepared to talk about things that go wrong, or moments that felt really tough for them. And the reason that works so well, and you're not doing it to be manipulative, is because you can all associate with that. You don't have to have had that exact experience, but everybody has those moments where you feel a bit down or things don't quite work out.
Yeah.
And so hearing from someone who actually is often in a position of presenting, sort of say, this was a moment where I did have to stop and think differently. Everyone else goes, oh, okay, well, that's okay, because I've had that as well.
Yeah.
So anything that you can do, I think, to create a connection with your audience is really powerful. And he also talked about caring. Somebody asked him a question. Actually, my sister was in the audience at that event and asked him a question. And he answered it on stage. But then afterwards, I watched him go up to Rachel, my sister, and actually talk to her further about the question. And he told me afterwards he didn't feel like he'd answered it as fully as he would have liked to.
That's such a nice thing to do.
And it was just that, you talk about connection. I think he managed to connect with a very big audience and then lots of individuals. And I think that's so powerful. And that's somebody who doesn't present for a job, doesn't really enjoy presenting, I don't think, that much. It's not really his thing. And yet he really stood out.
So a specific question for you, because I was also doing some presenting last week. And one thing that can be hard if you're presenting is the feedback that you get from the audience. So whether it's a small group of people or a large audience, when you get that like slightly blank
bored look.
Yeah. I was going to say blank, but let's go bored. And you're thinking, I don't know if what I'm saying is in any way resonating with you. What do you think you can do so that that doesn't affect your confidence in that moment?
Well, I think the thing that we've both learned actually presenting together from personal experience is people's resting faces can be quite misleading. So often when we're doing training together, you'll look around the room and there'll be some people who genuinely either look like they really don't want to be there, they either really disagree with what you're saying, or would rather be anywhere else other than doing your training. And that can sort of throw you a little bit. And what I've learned is that often it is those people who you have your first break and they come up to you and go, this is life-changing. This is the best thing I've ever done. And honestly, you're so surprised because you just think, oh, I thought you were hating it. Because also inevitably, sometimes those people are sitting at the back or sitting at the side. And maybe it's because actually they're a bit nervous. They don't want to be kind of sitting at the heart or at the centre of things. When people are absorbing information, people have different ways of doing that. And sitting and smiling and nodding along the whole time, which probably would be slightly more my approach, doesn't work for everyone. That doesn't mean that people can always take in information. So I think just be careful when you're presenting not to assume how people are taking that information in. Mm-hmm. And just because somebody maybe isn't reacting in the way that you maybe would like, they're not kind of smiling
clapping
or whatever,
away,
or clapping,
going,
this is the best thing ever.
Don't
assume that then it doesn't mean that they're not kind of supportive.
Yeah.
Because I think that's actually really dangerous. I think we've learnt that from experience.
So let's move on to some tips then on presenting. I have one that when I was at Eon quite a long time ago, we had an amazing woman come in to do like pitch training, and to the management team that I was part of at the time. What she got us all to do was to do a presentation about ourselves, often one of the most awkward things to do, to be honest.
Yeah.
Presentation about ourselves that was videoed, and we had to create some slides and deliver the presentation to our peers. So there's loads of stuff in that that's uncomfortable, to be honest. I think presenting to your peers can often be one of the harder things to do, true. I find, because you know them and they know you. And what I took away from that very specifically, from both the feedback that I had and the sort of the feedback that we were all getting, was a couple of things that have stuck with me. The first was to not let the slides be the focus of a presentation. So it is very easy when you're doing a presentation to kind of constantly look back to to stand to the left or right of some slides if you've got a big screen behind you, and you make it like that screen is the thing that's presenting and you're there to support it. So don't you constantly look back to it. Often that can be a confidence thing, because it feels, you're looking back to it because it takes the attention off you, or sometimes it can be because you don't know the content on there, so that might be an indication you need a bit more practice beforehand. But don't let the screen be the main focus of that room. You want to be the main focus of that room. So that was the first thing. And the second thing was to be aware of your body language. Sarah's also given me some specific feedback on this in the past, actually, which is that particular instance, what a lot of people did was they were doing really weird things with their hands, like they were holding onto a lectern, or they were holding onto a table, or fiddling. And so just be aware of those things. Sarah in the past has given me feedback about my legs. It's the kind of friend that she is. But no, she's told me that when I've been presenting before, I've had my legs crossed in that really weird way where you squiggle them around each other, and that it wasn't really a nervous thing. I think it's just a habit for me, but that it made me look small on the stage, and that wasn't the impression that I wanted to create with people.
And I think my kind of couple of top tips is, regardless of what style of presentation you're doing, whether it's to 2 people or hundreds, be really clear before you start what's the one thing you want people to remember. Because actually there's a lot of information for people to take in. People are generally not amazing listeners, just, people are not great at absorbing lots of information. So if I ask somebody a day later, a week later, what do you remember about my presentation? And that's something I have done in terms of a feedback technique, making sure that you know what it is you want people to remember, and then doing a really good job of telling people that at the start of the presentation, reminding people of it as you go through, reminding people at the end. And remember that only you know what you're going to say. So sometimes I find I've practiced presentations, particularly actually in smaller settings, that, when you're trying to persuade someone to sign an idea off, or to do something that you want to do within a business, and you've practiced it so much that you think, right, I know every sentence here. And then you can get a bit thrown or disappointed if you don't do it in exactly the way that you'd practiced. And that's when you've got to remember, okay, as long as I've got the key points across here, the other things that I say around that to provide colour and interest, but it doesn't need to be exact. And don't, if you've forgotten something, only you know that you've forgotten that. I actually was doing some training last week where someone said to me, I get really nervous presenting to senior people particularly. So I'm really good with my team, and then I go to do a senior presentation and I just feel like it's nowhere near as good. And I sort of said to her, but how do you know that? It's only because you're the only person who can compare and contrast in those two situations. Yeah. So yes, you might have been slightly better. But I said to her, have you asked any of those senior people? And she was like, oh, they all seem to think I'm really good. And I was like, yeah, but
there you go.
So that's fine then. So yes, it's harder sometimes in different contexts, but remember, you're the only person who sees all of that. So you're giving yourself like an overly hard time.
Yeah. It's just when we were talking there, it made me think of, again, some other feedback that you've given me in the past that's stuck with me. You probably won't remember this, but I spoke at a conference Sarah organised a couple of years ago about networking, probably, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago now. And I remember I had some notes I'd prepped for it, because I think for me, a tip is if you're going to do a presentation that's important to you, prepare for it. Don't let the first time you talk about it be that moment.
And practice out loud.
Yeah, practice out loud. And I practiced, and I'd written some, I think they were sort of cue cards. They had my notes on them. And I'd practiced so much that I did not need these cue cards. I remember what Sarah said to me afterwards was, you held those cards the whole time you were on stage.
Like your life depended on it, I think.
I never looked at them once. And I remember Sarah saying, just don't take them on next time with you. Yeah. And I think there's a couple of things there. One, just be aware about your props. Like, you might have a bottle of water, and again, do you need that prop?
Yeah.
You're like, why have you got it there? And also just get someone to give you feedback and be really open to listening about it. Sarah does that for me a lot, and it always sticks with me, and I definitely change what I'm doing as a result of that. And it's, if you're going to put yourself out there to present, treat it as a learning opportunity for you. Growth mindset, we say it pretty much every week.
Ding, ding.
Ding. But it's really good to have somebody that can give you that learning opportunity to watch you and be really specific with the things they think you could do even better.
And it is about getting better each time. So having cue cards is absolutely fine. If it's the first time you've presented and you're really nervous, if that's the thing that helps you to just feel more confident, that's fine. And then the next time you might take those away. And just finally on top tips, it is actually for once me doing a slightly cheesier sort of sentiment. I'm not sure it's even a quote. But remember, people remember how you made them feel, not what you say. And I just think that's really true. So try and create the connections and the relationships. Don't worry about the exact content.
Oh, Sarah, that's the nicest quote and meaning.
I don't think it's a proper quote. I think that was my best attempt at trying to do a quote. Was like, just try and make people feel good.
Yeah, pretty important, like a mission for life, I think.
Yeah.
So one resource this week, because I think we were talking about this beforehand, what we can recommend, and we just kept coming back to TED-tastic,
basically.
TED. So whether it's the TED app or it's the TED website or it's the TED book about public speaking, you can go on the website and you can see which speakers resonate with you and engage you, and you can take some insights about how you might do some of the things that they're doing, or you can read their book on public speaking if you want to get some very specific tips about what you can do, or actually on TED they have some videos about how to do public speaking. So if there's one resource we can recommend to you, and often we're surprised about the number of people that don't know about TED, so just go to TED.com, and there's an app as well. It is an amazing source for curiosity, but on this topic in particular, you can pick up a whole lot of learning and insight just from looking at that content.
And so I think that's about it for this week. As ever, thank you so much for listening. I think we now have reached over 20,000 listeners in total, which then makes me really nervous about everything I say as soon as I think about that, because that sounds like way too many people. Please do keep giving us your feedback. We love to hear from you. Our email address is getinktouch@amazingif.com. You can follow us on Instagram, amazingif, or you can tweet us amazing_if.
That's
that
correct.
right?
That's correct.
There was definitely a question at the end of that. I was like, is that right?
It's correct, Sarah.
So yeah, please, and we love to hear ideas for future podcasts, what you enjoy about the podcast. Please do review, rate us, share us with other people. We're really keen to kind of extend the Squiggly Career podcast
community.
Podcasties, is that a thing?
Squigglers.
Yeah, that sounds weird. Okay, we won't use that phrase. And next week we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome, which is something that one of our listeners asked us to discuss in more detail, building really on the confidence series that we did last year. So we look forward to doing that next week. In the meantime, have a lovely week. Thanks again for listening. Bye for now.
Bye.